Hi again, folks. I've just got some questions about direct action modelling, the auctions and starting off with the carbon price repeal. So I assume we've got the right people at the table. The government's repeatedly claimed that the repeal of the carbon price would save Australian households $550 per year. Can the department provide a breakdown of how much households have actually saved since the repeal of the carbon price?
Senator, I do have some information on that. First of all, figures released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics showed that electricity prices decreased by 5.1% in the period immediately following the carbon tax repeal. So that's not specifically attributing the change to the repeal of the carbon tax, but that was the as observed by the ABS, that was the decline in electricity prices. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has also produced an estimate of the average decrease in household electricity prices attributed to the repeal of the carbon tax, and that was in a range between 4.5% and 10.6%. And that is because the impact varies state by state.
And sorry, do you have those in dollar figures?
I shall look. No, unfortunately at the moment I've only got the ACCC figures in terms of percentage change.
Is there someone else in the room that's got the dollar figures?
We can take it on this.
It's pretty widely known to be about $140. Is there anything you've got in front of you that can corroborate that figure?
It doesn't look like it, unfortunately, Senator, no.
Right, well, thank you for taking that on notice. Can I ask also that you table the figures that you've provided to the Minister for his announcements about the change in electricity bills per network distribution area? Do you have that to hand?
So I don't believe I have that to hand, Senator, so I would have to look at taking that on notice.
Okay, thank you. And can you just make sure in the provision of that that you separate out the fixed service charge from the other aspects?
Yes, certainly if we can, we will do that, Senator.
Thank you, great. Okay, so moving now to the modelling on which direct action is based. Firstly, how much of the 5% pollution reduction target that the government's committed to is expected to be achieved by the direct action policy?
We've discussed this a few times, Senator. There are a number of factors in play, but one is where the actual emissions profile will go to 2020. So I think next month we'll be releasing our projections. The government will release its projections on emissions profile. But the second is depends how many factors within the emissions reduction fund are tied down, and while the crediting and purchasing component is now tied down through legislation, the safeguards component is still to be determined, and until that's determined, we're really not in a position to say how all these factors will deliver the 5% reduction. Except to say that the government has repeated that it has the instruments at hand to be able to deliver that 5%. But in terms of the different components and how they add together, that's something that's until all the characteristics and features of the system are determined, it's very hard to isolate.
So when you say the government has the instruments at hand to deliver the 5%, do you mean above and beyond the direct action plan? Well,
direct action includes the emissions reduction fund and the range of other instruments. So the emissions reduction fund is the core tool or instrument for direct action, but there are other elements of direct action, like the renewables and other components. I think are included.
Okay, so are you separating out, for example, a renewable energy target, energy efficiency, manufacturing slowdown? Are you separating that out from direct action when you say the government has instruments to hand? Are you anticipating that direct action is the umbrella that
All of those will go to determine what the emissions outcome is.
Indeed.
And so the policy elements, some of those policy elements are yet, so particularly the safeguards element, that's yet to be determined, so until that's determined, we know exactly what that is, which is that process that we're underway through having a consultation around, and those regulations are passed, we can't say exactly what that contribution is.
So you can't say how you're going to meet the 5%?
Except to say that the instrument set, the toolkit is there to do that.
But it's
So
not yet written.
Well, that's part of the determination of those instruments.
Okay. So given that the government...
Sorry,
Beg your
Senator.
pardon?
It's been really every Senate estimates, we've had a conversation
We're
around
still
these
waiting for an
factors.
answer. I think that's probably why we keep asking.
Well, the different factors are being locked down. So the key difference is actually that the legislation for the accrediting and purchasing is now in place, and that's about to start.
Sure. So given that the government does frequently insist that it will reach its 5% target by 2020 and claims that it's confident in doing so, what evidence is there on which to base that confidence? The government's position has been that whenever Australia has made commitments along these lines, so for example with the first Kyoto Protocol period, that commitment was met. In fact, it was more than met. And that Australia's practice is that we don't enter into agreements that we're not prepared to deliver. So when the government says that it's going to deliver the 5% reduction on 2000 levels by 2020, that it will do so. And given that that's been our past practice, in fact, that's something that Australia has regularly delivered on. Okay, so there's no evidence base per se because you still haven't locked down the parameters of how you meet the 5%, but you're confident based on past practice that it will be met.
That's actually the standard practice for every country. Every country can't predict with certainty exactly that it's going to meet because it doesn't know.
So you can have confidence without certainty. Is that what you're saying?
No. Well, with absolute certainty. So you're saying that what delivers it is that the government's committed to it, and it has an instrument set that can be calibrated to meet that requirement or meet that commitment.
Okay.
But that's actually the standard thing for every country.
Sure. Well, I suggest that the confidence might not be so bold if that's in fact the situation, but that's not a matter for they're not your words, they're the government's words. So thank you for your response. There was a question on notice response 1075 which talked about modelling, and in that the department effectively seemed to be implying that you wouldn't reveal modelling for fear that someone could reverse engineer and effectively work out the average auction price. Can I just clarify that that is your approach, that you won't be releasing the modelling?
I think the sense had been that going into the auctions, that there were numbers in the budget, in the 14-15 budget, there were specific expenditure numbers allocated across the forward estimates for the purchasing component of the emissions reduction fund. The concern was that if you break down that component and say what the quantum is in each of those periods, you're implicitly revealing what the projected price is, and that we weren't going to go and reveal our estimates calculations around possible prices over the forward estimates ahead of an auction.
Would you release them after the auction?
I think that's a matter for government, Senator.
I might add, Senator, that remains an ongoing. The government conditioning its own future expectations of prices remains an ongoing issue, but the Clean Energy Regulator will publish after auctions from memory, the weighted average price that was settled at the auction. One feature of these auctions is they are pay-as-you-bid auctions, so there's not a single price that everyone receives in these auctions. If there were, I'll just use a very simple example, two people bidding, one with $5 and one with $10, and both were bids acceptable to the auction. This isn't how the auctions work, but just by way of example. Then the person who bid 5 would get 5 and the person who bid 10 would get 10. They don't settle at a single price. So this is a way of extracting as much abatement as possible from the amount of money being given to the auction to basically pay just what you have to. And so it's one of the reasons we have been quite cautious around any conditioning of the market about what what we expect prices to be. That market will see what the price was settled at an auction, but we'll remain cautious. But of course, as Secretary said, it's a matter for government, but about conditioning the market about what we expect future prices to be.
Sure.
Sorry, so we will
Can I
be...
just confirm that you will release the modelling after the auction so we can compare the modelling and the actual outcome?
These are typically our budget forecasts, Senator. The issue in the future is that the government will be releasing, or the CER will be releasing the prices at each auction.
Yes.
But what's implied in the budget, in the forward estimates, is our projected or our expected future set of prices, and that issue still comes up. How much of the future our expectation of prices we should release to the public. All right. Because that could affect the auction dynamics themselves.
Okay, no, I understand that. Thank you. Just back on the methodologies which Senator Singh was asking about, I believe one of those is about capturing methane at mine sites. I presume that's the coal mine waste gas methodology that you referred to as one of the 7 new legislative instruments under ERF. Which companies have been pushing for this new methodology or working with the department to create it?
So Senator, the process for developing the methods at present is that the department works in collaboration with technical and other experts through technical working groups. So a number of experts, technical and business representatives participate on those groups. My colleague Ms Tilley may have details as to who's on that technical working group with her, if that would assist.
Thank you. Yes, that'd be great.
Thanks, Senator. Kristen Tilley, Assistant Secretary of the Method Development Branch. Unfortunately, I don't have the specific names in front of me, but we can provide that on notice. I will just flag, though, that this method supports waste coal mine gas capture and destruction at operating underground coal mines, and those exist predominantly or entirely in Queensland and New South Wales. So the membership of the technical working group was predominantly members of coal mines in those states.
Okay, and beyond the industry reps, who else formed the working group?
We had members of state governments that were interested in this issue also participating. There's also the issue that we have a wider, what's called reference group. So it's a wider group of interested stakeholders that don't physically participate in the meetings but are kept up to date through minutes, papers that are circulated and are able to comment on those.
Thank you. Well, if you could just get back to me with all of the names and relevant affiliations of the people on the working group as opposed to and the reference group too, if that's easily obtainable. Have you had any companies yet make an expression of interest or indicate that they intend to participate in the auction in that particular coal mine waste methodology?
So the Clean Energy Regulator will actually register projects, so they have the closer information on what projects are actually physically coming forward and registered. Anecdotally, there is, I think, some interest, particularly from companies that specialise in the equipment that is used to capture and combust waste coal mine gas in bringing forward projects.
But no actual miners themselves?
Not to my knowledge.
No. Okay. Do you have a process in place around the development of baselines?
So Senator, sometimes in the ERF there are different sorts of baselines that can be in play. With respect to the waste coal mine method that Ms Tilley's talking about, there is a baseline above which abatement or the Australian carbon credit units are assessed as being generated. Is that the sort of baseline that you have in mind?
Yes. How will you set that for the waste gas?
So Ms Tilley,
what's the process for setting that for the waste gas?
Sure. So what the method typically allows is new projects which haven't previously captured or combusted the waste coal mine gas, operating underground coal mines. So their baseline is effectively zero because they haven't done that previously. What the method does allow for is expansion beyond nameplate capacity of an existing system at a site. So what that means is if a waste coal mine, if a operating underground coal mine has a waste coal mine gas capture facility or set of pipes and flares and that sort of thing, we would look at what the full capacity of that system is, not what it ran at, not what the average performance was, but what the full capacity of that system was, and then only credit beyond that.
Sure.
So
How many
what
actually have those systems, though, out of interest?
Sorry?
Are there any that actually do have those systems in place already?
Yes, there are. Yep.
Is that a common thing? Is it?
My brief recollection is of the 42 operating underground coal mines in Australia, around half had some system in place to either flare or combust and generate electricity from that waste coal mine gas.
Okay, and so for those that didn't have any of that technological facility already, how would you set their baseline?
So, as I said, because they haven't done it, their baseline is zero, so what they combust beyond that is credited. In the case of Queensland, because there's a regulation in Queensland which requires operating underground coal mines to destroy their waste coal mine gas where it's technically feasible to do so, in practice what that means is flaring, new flaring projects in Queensland would not be eligible under the ERF.
Okay, thank you. Just going on to the options, and if I need to ask these to the CER, I will. Given that there's been quite a level of disinterest from the big banks in the ERF auctions, because it's reported as being perceived as short-term and risky policy, and combining that with the high transaction costs for the bid preparations, what level of interest is the department expecting in the auctions?
Senator, we won't comment on your assessment.
I'm not sure where that information is coming from.
Business Spectator from last year, the four banks saying not interested.
The Business Spectator needs to speak to its own analysis. What I can make some remarks about where we expect the initial interest, in particular, to be in the auction, and Ms Munro may follow this up later, is of course there are a number of CFI projects transitioning across to the ERF arrangements, with many with 7-year crediting periods in front of them, and this will be an opportunity for them to secure value for those emissions reductions that they would get credited under these arrangements. So there is actually considerable interest around those.
Sure, that's because the CFI has been working quite well.
Around those projects. We've had quite a bit of interest, and perhaps the best way to do this is by giving you, I don't have in front of me, but through question on notice, the people who've been part of our technical working groups, but quite a bit of interest across all our technical working groups for developing methods. And we would expect projects to come forward out of that process. So at least in the early auction, and I think it's well reported that we expect a lot of the interest, because we're just developing the new methods now, to come from those existing CFI projects. But I think we're confident that the methods we're developing keep transaction costs as low as possible, which is why we have the technical working group. And I'd expect as contracts are being signed, these are 7-year contracts for for abatement with the price fixed in the contract, that the interest will continue to develop.
So there was some media reports. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Can I just have 2 more questions? Thank you. So just on that final point, there was some media reports saying that the response to the ERF auctions was subdued. I'm interested if you can perhaps take on notice how many firms have actually submitted statement of interests in bidding, and likewise, as a second part to that first question, what you're doing to mitigate against most of them just coming from the landfill industry. So if you could take that on notice. But can I quickly move with my final question to the New South Wales major projects offsets policy, which on its face appears to allow double dipping in terms of biodiversity offsets and carbon credits. Is there anybody who's looking at that double dipping in the process of the accreditation of that policy under the proposed approval by LAT?
So, Senator, I understand that this is an issue that has been raised with colleagues in the broader department who are also looking at this policy and that broader set of issues. It's been raised with us. We've indicated that we're very interested in working through those issues with our colleagues in the New South Wales Government to ensure that the integrity of the Emissions Reduction Fund is maintained in that regard. So I think it's probably worth mentioning that the issue that Ms Tilley was talking about earlier with respect to the waste coal mine gas is a similar type of issue in as much as it turns around this regulatory additionality test, which is endeavouring to ensure that projects aren't required under either Commonwealth or another jurisdiction's legislation.
Can you just perhaps take on notice for me then? I had thought that there was a legislative precluding of offsets being counted for ERF purposes. If that's not the case, can you let me know, and if there is any plans to make that the case?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you.
Happy to.
Thank you, Chair. Acting Chair.